was first approached by these producers, Isaac Klausner, Marty Bowen, and Wick Godfrey. And I had just finished Whiplash. So this would be in 2014. They approached me actually about a few projects, that I might be interested in, and one of which was basically an adaptation of this book by Jim Hansen called First Man. It was a biography of Neil Armstrong's life. And I didn't at first think I was interested. Space hadn't been a sort of an obsession of mine, and I didn't know much about Neil beyond the sort of broad strokes that I'd learned in school, and I just didn't feel I had anything that I could relate to in it. And it wasn't until they sort of talked to me a little more about the project and I started reading Jim's book and learned certain key things about Neil that shifted my perspective on him. Most importantly, that he and his wife Janet had lost a child of theirs right before he joined the astronaut program. That was something that kind of opened my eyes a little bit to not just who he was and who they were, but what the movie could be about. That it actually didn't have to be a movie about space or about the mission to the moon as much as a movie about a marriage and a family and grief and trying to move on after loss. And so that kind of became the guideline for me and for everyone in making the movie, and what I think really inspired me to want to make it. I was very lucky to work with a great writer, Josh Singer. Right at the outset, I knew that the amount of research needed for the movie and the sort of deep dive that I wanted to do to try to get it right would be beyond my skill set as a writer, and so I knew I wanted to work with someone to accomplish that, and Josh just has this sort of amazing ability to kind of meld journalism with narrative storytelling and somehow combine a very rigorous approach to historical fiction with the sort of demands of the big screen. I went off and made La La Land while Josh was doing a lot of the writing on the script, and it was really mostly after La La Land had finished that I started diving into the research myself with Ryan Gosling as well, who was on board. So together we met with Neil's family, with his kids, with Janet Armstrong, with Neil's sister June, with various colleagues of Neil's and people at NASA and former astronauts and former flight controllers and former technicians and engineers, and just trying to kind of get a sense from as many different sources as we could of what Neil was like, because I never got the chance to meet the man himself, but also what that world was like, what that time was like, what that community was like, trying to get a sense of kind of what the day-to-day might have been like. And so that was very important to us to try to get those details, not just the big picture things, but the really in-between moments and the moments behind closed doors between husband and wife and between parents and their children and between friend to friend, and just those kind of little textures that we felt would hopefully add to a bigger whole in the film. We decided to go the LED screen route early on, and we did our first camera test was with some LED screens on a small little black stage, and it's just a slightly more modern version of rear projection, basically, like the old days when they would put people in cars and on a soundstage and project behind them. I prefer it to green screen. We didn't use any green screen in the film, mainly because, for a few reasons. One, because I think for the actors, it's so much more effective for them to get to see what we're going to see in the final film. So they have something to react to. They can actually feel like they're in space, feel like they're landing on the moon, feel like they're seeing Earth from a window's view. That kind of interactive experience, I think, helped their performances. It also helped our camera work, because we were able to really set this up as though it were real with the LED projection and with these full-scale replicas of the capsules moving in front of the LED screen, so that when you're in the capsule or mounted to the capsule, as most of our space photography is in the film, you actually could feel through the camera's eye on set. Even though we were in a soundstage in Atlanta, we could feel like we were in space. We could actually feel like we were not making a fictional film, but making a documentary and reacting instinctively to things as they would happen. So it was trying to create as much of a three-dimensional reality for not just the actors, but ourselves as filmmakers to help inspire our choices. So it's the sort of thing where you actually have to do a lot of pre-planning because you can't punt it to post via green screen, but you're doing it so that it hopefully feels as unpre-planned as possible, so that it feels real and just feels like we were up in space and catching, little details from the corner of our eyes and reacting instinctively to those things. Even the few shots where we leaned on archival, just because we loved the sort of look and feel of it, even there we still had to, we could never just play the archival on its own. We had to, so it'll be about half the shot is archival and half is recreated. So it was always a matter of trying to make it feel as real as possible, and sometimes that meant trying to do exact approximations of archival footage, but sort of do it our way. Other times it meant actually taking, like in those few shots, taking the archival elements, the raw archival elements, and then sort of augmenting them, expanding them to 2:4 aspect ratio, maybe relighting them or sort of calibrating them to fit into the story we were telling. So it was often this sort of mix and match. But yeah, I'd say about 99% of the imagery in the film was created from scratch by the VFX team and by the production designer and the miniatures team and Lena Sangren, our DP. But we always wanted it to feel like archival, so that even if it was initially a piece of VFX, it would, by the time it was on screen, have been filtered through more old-fashioned filming techniques, so that the whole thing would never feel CG, it would feel analog. NASA was incredibly helpful, really generous with us, helping us find advisors who would be on set with us while we were shooting, opening their doors to us physically during prep, and sometimes during the shoot itself. We got to shoot down at Cape Kennedy for scenes involving the crawler in the VAB building as they're taking the Saturn rocket out, and everything but the Saturn rocket itself was real, the real thing. It was the real crawler, the real VAB building, the real van the astronauts went into to go to the launch pad. All those things were exactly the things that Neil and his colleagues had used, and NASA was able to sort of pull them out and let us shoot the real thing. So that was an amazing privilege. But before that, just the amount of research that NASA was able to facilitate, and as well as training, all not just Ryan, but all the actors playing astronauts in the film were able to spend the better part of a week, both in Houston and at the Cape in Florida, getting to sort of do space camp, basically getting to do a kind of crash course in astronaut training, testing out zero-G simulations, lunar gravity simulations, various flight simulators, putting on suits, looking at moon rocks, all that kind of stuff. It was, I think it was a lot of fun and also obviously very informative for all of us. Making this movie was very different in many ways for me from anything I'd done before, but I think the most important difference was just that responsibility of knowing you're dealing with real people's lives. For instance, Neil's kids, Rick and Mark, who were so helpful to us when we were making the film, we knew when they saw the film, that they weren't going to be seeing historical figures from the past on screen. They were going to be seeing their mom and their dad and themselves. And so when it came to them, when it came to the kids of Ed and Pat White, when it came to people like Mike Collins and Buzz Aldrin and many of those astronauts who are still with us, or people at NASA, both from the 60s and from today, all of these people we felt a certain responsibility to. This was a period in history that required a tremendous amount of sacrifice. Families really put everything on the line. In many cases, lives were lost, families were split apart. There was real cost on an emotional and physical and human level to these achievements that we all now as humanity get to glory in, get to revel in. So it felt, it felt important to try to get that right, but it also in a way was at the heart of the inspiration at the beginning of even wanting to make the movie, was trying to remind people that these were humans, that these weren't mythological creatures. This wasn't, these weren't superheroes, these weren't demigods. These were ordinary human beings doing extraordinary things at tremendous cost, with tremendous uncertainty and fear and possibility of loss at every step of the way. And so to try to humanize that and flesh that out for a contemporary audience, hopefully the hope was that that would be some way of paying tribute to those real people. I can't imagine how strange it must have been, for Neil's kids to not just to see the film, but to to just be part of the process from the get-go. I mean, they read many drafts of the script and gave us notes, and then they came to set when we were shooting. I can just imagine walking into sets that are reconstructions of their childhood homes and things. How surreal that must be. But they were incredibly gracious every step of the way, and we were so relieved and thrilled when they did see the finished film and felt that it was an honest portrayal of what they remembered. I mean, that was I'd say more than anything the result we were hoping for. There was no reaction to us that was more important or as important as theirs would be, so we just hoped that, well, if they find it honest, if they feel that it's truthful, that it gets at some aspect of what it was actually like to be an astronaut family in the 60s in Houston, then we had done our job. But we never would have gotten there without them, or without the other families, the other people who just gave us their time, their insights, their feedback, their technical expertise, their memories. So many people were so generous and gracious with us and opening their doors to help us tell it right. I was lucky to, when I was starting out, to have various mentors along the way who I could lean on for advice and for insight, and sometimes just for encouragement, because sometimes that can be the most important thing. You hear so many no's, so many rejections, along the way of trying to get a film made or get a story that you want to told. And so, in some ways, I think the best advice I maybe ever heard was which I try to keep, with me to this day, which is, is that it doesn't matter if you hear 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 no's. All you need is one yes. And so to try to kind of keep that kind of faith and to keep being persistent and to not be discouraged, to not be overly sensitive to those rejections. I think that's really key. You have to develop a sort of thick skin and kind of soldier on with a belief that the story you're trying to tell is worth telling. It doesn't mean to shut yourself off from what could be very valid critiques or feedback from outside sources, but to have that kind of strength of will inside, to not be discouraged and to not be sent packing the other direction. I think in some ways that's the greatest kind of skill to develop of all, and maybe the most useful.